few minutes and do that, and then turn them in, turn your bell work in, and then open up your evidence journals. We got to those yesterday, right? Yeah. Okay, go ahead and open those up, and then I'll give you a little bit more instruction once we're ready to go. So just to clarify a little bit, just to make sure we're kind of all on the same page, I want you to be thinking about, not really just necessarily how your thinking has changed about evolution, but in light of the evidence that we talked about, geologic time and dating fossils, and you started reading a little bit more yesterday about kind of like a really sort of tangible, like modern day example. So just think about that and think a little bit about how your thinking has changed, and then what sort of questions do you still have about how that, how living things change over time. So as soon as you're done with the bell work, put it in the Dropbox, and then take a look at your evidence journals, and then as soon as I see your evidence journals up on your screen, then I'll know you're ready to be done. So once you turn in your bell work, I want you, in your evidence folders, you should have put the articles that we were using yesterday. I want you to get those articles back out. Get yours, okay? And then we left off yesterday where you were making some entries in your evidence journals about different pieces of evidence we've examined over time about the theory of evolution. That was really kind of pointing again at that big question that we had. We call it our driving question. And that was about how do living things, or how have living things changed over time. I'll put it back up there. Okay? How have living things changed over time? And I asked you in your evidence journal to, include some pieces that we've discussed that seem to point to explaining that question. Okay? And so I think as I'm walking around, so you put some things down about geologic time, put things down about dating fossils, those sorts of things. Now what I want you to do is, I asked you yesterday, when you read that article about these birds on this group of islands off the coast of Ecuador, I asked you to highlight all of the things that would seem to help us answer that question. Right? How have living things changed over time? And so what I want you to do now is take the pieces that you highlighted and add them to your evidence journal. And really focus on that last column there. Remember, that last column says, what does it tell me about evolution? So take the things that you've highlighted, add them to your evidence journal. And when you're done adding what you need to, go ahead and close your Chromebooks, because we're going to have some discussion about this. Okay? I want you to talk with your group members about the things that you highlighted. Okay? Certainly there's going to be some consistency, but there may also be things that you thought were important that maybe somebody else didn't really think was as important, and I want you to talk about that. Really, again, focusing on this. Okay, what does what you highlighted help us to answer this question? How have living things changed over time? Okay, 2 minutes. Talk about what you highlighted, why you highlighted it, what does it help us to answer with that? Okay, ready to go. to examine and see what it tells us about what we're trying to figure out. Okay? So again, focused on the idea. How have living things changed over time? What did you highlight? Why? What does it seem to tell us? Or what would be suggested? Or how could we explain this question based on some of the evidence that you highlighted from the article? Joe, I'm going to start with you because you and I talked about something that I think is probably something important to consider.
I highlighted finches don't migrate.
Why is that important? Sorry, I didn't cut you off.
The birds must have adapted on that island to survive.
So when you say adapted, what do you mean by that?
Evolved to survive.
Okay. Thoughts? Consistency? How many of you highlighted that part? There's something that the migration piece is important. Julie, why did you highlight it too? You guys are in the same group?
Yeah.
Why did you highlight it?
Because it I think it shows how they how the birds would have had to evolve on.
So when we say, let's just, before we go any further, because I see kind of a common thread here. When we use the term evolve, what are we talking about? Just so we can have a common definition. Jamie?
Changing over time.
Changing over time. Okay? Can everybody agree with that? All right? So when we use the term evolve, because to evolve and adapt, I think a lot of times we start to use those terms synonymously, and they may not necessarily always mean the same thing. All right? So we're talking about change over time. Okay? Who else highlighted the thing about migration? A lot of you. Gianna, tell me a little bit, share with the class a little bit about what we discussed.
I said that it was important for how each one suited, each beak was suited for a different task. And I said it because it says that in the beginning there's a total of 13 beaks that all the finches have.
Okay.
And having it saying that each species is distinguished by a different beak, one suited for a different task, could be for example, if one finch has a small beak for smaller seeds, and then another finch has a bigger beak for the bigger seeds, then if they're the same type of finch except different beaks, how did it get the difference?
You're saying how did we end up with a difference between beak sizes?
Yeah.
That's a pretty valuable question. What do we think about that? I want to make sure we involve everybody here, so that's why. Damien, what do you think? How do they do that? When you say adapt to their environment, do you mean that there's within an individual bird's lifetime that bird's beak is changing? What do we think about that? I'm going to go with Nikki, and then I'm going to come back to you, Jamie. Go ahead.
This is about natural selection, so if they're evolving over time and their offspring are having these different beaks, I guess it's the ones that don't have the beak that didn't evolve to do what they need to do on each island or in this climate or whatever, because how they don't migrate. But if you could do it, just that.
So you're saying the ones that if they have to change, the ones that can't, they just die.
Yeah.
Jamie, what were you going to say?
I was going to say how probably the beaks over time as food, so because it says in here that there was a food drought, so probably as food amounts began to change, the finches also began to change, meaning that the less food they had, the less healthy they would grow, which would cause a smaller beak, which would then lead to the different species from the bigger beaks, which had more food amounts, to the smaller beaks, which had less.
I'm going to ask for a vote here. I want you to give me thumbs up, thumbs down. Okay? Thumbs up, you agree with the statement that I say. Thumbs down, no. Thumb in the middle, not entirely sure. Okay? Thumbs up. A physical feature like a bird, like a beak size or shape. will change in an individual bird's lifetime if they need to survive based on certain foods. Give me a thumbs up, give me a thumbs down. A physical feature like a bird beak, size and shape will change within an individual's lifetime. Pretty evenly split. Some here, which is fine, right? I see some thumbs down, I see some thumbs up. Damien, can you talk a little about why your thumbs down?
Because once they have a future, it doesn't change. And how I interpreted it was when they had the drought, the ones that had nothing to eat because they couldn't eat the bigger seeds, they just died off. So the ones that lived were the ones that reproduced, and they had the bigger beaks.
Thoughts?
I agree.
Give me my thumbs up people again. Where are my thumbs up people? Bird beaks are going to change. Richard, why do you say that?
Well, sort of like what Jamie said, if they're not healthy, then I figure if they do reproduce, then maybe some of them might have deformities or abnormalities, which would make newer birds coming, baby birds, when they grow older and they start to reproduce with other birds, then it would create new, maybe a new species of bird or something. I don't know.
Okay.
Okay.
So you're saying that change may eventually result in a new species? As long as what? What would be the conditions for that?
As long as maybe, I don't know.
No. Lorraine, what were you going to say? Were you going to raise your hand? Yeah, what were you saying?
Off of what Damien said, how the physical traits don't change, and then the smaller birds who can't eat the seeds, they kind of die off, or they can either adapt to eating bigger, seeds, but I don't really think the beaks would change size. It would just be able to adapt to eating the seeds.
So you're saying they would, whether they could or couldn't, they would just eat whatever was available. Okay? Nikki, I'm going to come back to you in a second. Okay? Clarify for me if I'm correct or incorrect. I feel like we're kind of having two different schools of thought here. Okay? So we're kind of coming up with two different explanations, if I'm hearing you correctly. Alright? Explanation number one, or explanation A, right, says organisms can evolve or change over time. And when we say that, we mean gain or lose or modify a particular physical feature throughout their individual lifetimes because they learn to adapt to the environment. Damien, is that kind of what you're saying? Okay? Other school of thought, other Damien, clarify for me, this is what you're saying, right? Organisms that do not possess features that are required to survive, they die. Okay? And those that survive become more common over time. That's what you're saying. Okay. School of thought A, school of thought B. 2 minutes in your group, discuss those things. All right? Go. He was in the middle. He hit everyone else, right? What are you so unsure of? What about each of them makes sense? That's side B. You're on side A. You're all on side A. So then how would that relate to? Because the alternative is death, right? So you either learn to survive or you die.
I mean, I was saying like it's also related to like situation.
What's the relationship?
Like when it's winter, we all wear jackets so we don't like get
Okay.
which is like a bad situation. So we wear jackets outside when it's extremely cold in order to survive.
How is that different from invention?
Well, I mean, like you choose to wear.
Okay, so it's a conscious choice. It's not like a physical limitation.
It's not a physical limitation, but then also like let's say you're ready to like certain your body does that for you. Break your legs. Your body
At the bottom of the
works
small
together.
common, so those will be only where they might survive. So
Okay. Let's talk about this. Let's discuss. Now, here's okay, there's a small likelihood this may become a little animated. Okay? So I want you to really make sure you're listening to what other people are saying. Okay? Listen closely so that you can respond, right? And you're taking into consideration what they're saying. Okay? So Lorraine and I just had a short conversation, and then I'm gonna open it up to the floor here. Okay? Can you explain a little bit about what you and I were just discussing?
Well, it's kind of like, how finches, like their beaks can't change over one lifetime, over one bird lifetime. It kind of changes over varieties of birds, like throughout generations, not throughout just one bird. If the bird can't survive, then it just dies. But other than that, they can still adapt. They can adapt to their environment. And I guess throughout the next generation, birds' beak can't change.
Okay, so you're talking about the beak not changing in an individual bird's lifetime, but maybe over generations. Taylor, you guys are on side A too, right?
Yeah.
Explain why.
Because I don't know how to explain.
Tell me something.
Because if they
I'm
can't-
very unconvinced because I'm kind of, for all intents and purposes, I'm like right here. Yeah, because I think you're all making pretty logical and rational arguments. I'm asking you to convince the unconvinced right now. Allison?
I think side B, because it says each bird has a beak suited to certain eating habits. So if like one bird is like used to eating one thing, and then they're gonna start, when the food's gone, they're gonna start dying off because they're used to eating that like one particular thing. So that's why I think it's B, because they would have to die off, and the ones with the bigger beaks, they're gonna stay longer, so they're gonna keep reproducing.
So you're saying there's a relationship between what their beak and what they're eating. What would control what they're eating? Or, I'm sorry, what would control their food? The availability of food. What do we have from the article that tells us anything about how food may vary? Jacob?
Oh, like climate change or like drought or like there's too many species of like too many of the same species in like one place, like overpopulation. So there's like less food. So then like the species is forced to like eat something else, or else they're gonna be competing for one thing. And then since they're competing for one thing, the food's eventually gonna run out and they're all gonna die unless they eat something else.
Thoughts about that? You think so, man?
I think that the ones that don't have the beaks suited for the food that they would die is their beaks that can't change. They like genetically modified the way they are, and their offspring will be able to reproduce with different beaks.
So So you're bringing in, you're saying that there's some sort of genetic component to this. So now we're starting to put a lot of balls in the air, right? Now we have genetics, right? We're saying genetics has something to do with it. We're saying food has something to do with it. I want to stick with the food thing for a second, because that seems to be pretty consistent. Raise your hand if you agree that food has something to do with how these beaks are changing over time. Raise your hand. Disagree would mean not raising hand. Okay, so everybody's hands up. We have a consensus that the food has something to do with this. Now let's stick with this for a second. Yeah, what were you going to say?
I'm gonna say that, like, maybe because of the food and the different food they'd be taking in, that it could have something to do with the genetics, because like a mutation could occur because they're not getting the same nutrients.
Damien?
Well, I kind of stand by my statement that it's B. However, I was also thinking that organisms can evolve. However, it's not physical; it's more behavioral.
Say more about that.
Like, they can't change how they are, but they can, for example, act in a different way to prevent death, so they can survive.
Damien?
Yeah, like what David said. Like they can change. Like what happened in the story was like they lost their food and all the drought. There was no more small seeds, so they had to get eat the bigger seeds. So that became their like main food. They changed their behavior.
Yeah.
Okay. I kind of have like, you can relate it to like humans, for example. Like let's say you break your leg and you like go to the doctor. Well, you want like to survive using that leg. So the doctor like wraps it up, you have a broken leg, and then like a few months later, your leg's fixed, like it's back to normal. Well, it could kind of be like the finches, like how they didn't have enough food, like with their beaks, and they couldn't eat the big seeds. So they kind of just like evolved into being able to eat the big seeds by like because they have to survive.
Mateo?
I just have a question on finches. Like, are there beaks, like, the different species, is their beaks, like, bigger than one another, or, like, completely different shapes?
So you're saying if you had the opportunity to maybe look at different species of birds and compare them, you might be able to,
Yeah.
that would be helpful? Well, I just happen to have some pictures of finches. So I'm going to give you these. Okay? So, yeah, imagine that. That whole preparation sort of thing, you know? I don't know. So, yeah, I happen to have one for everybody too, one for every group. So given that, actually maybe looking at different beak sizes and maybe different species of finches might help you figure this out a little bit, take 2 minutes with your group and talk about, look at, here's 4 different species of birds, 4 different species of finches on the Galapagos Islands. Talk a little bit about how that may be significant to us being on side A or side B. Okay? Go ahead and do that. How do you get this and then do this?
It just does not work.
See, I
So, in light of some new information, what do we think? No, those aren't. I don't know. Are they? You're singing, are they really?
That's what's out at this time of year, yeah.
Oh, that's really creepy. Maybe we're communicating with them in a very unique way.
Maybe they would try to give us information.
It's like maybe they are. Maybe they are. Trying to provide you new evidence to help you determine side A or B. Okay, so I'm gonna have Angel talk about something that we were discussing over here, but then I want to kind of bounce back to because I think it relates to what Jamie you were just saying. So, Angel, tell us about what we just discussed here.
Like if you have a finch with a bigger beak and then one with like a small beak, and then they could make a finch with like a medium-sized beak, so then it would affect like what their offspring eats and what they eat.
Can you hold up that picture and show us? You were pointing to certain pictures and explaining that to me. Can you show us?
Like if you took the one with the
Actually, why don't you stand up for a second so we can all see what you're saying?
if you took the one with the biggest beak and then one with the smallest beak, it might have an offspring that looks like one of these two.
So you're saying the genetics of one and the genetic combination of one, the genetic combination of the other would result in a different feature, a different physical trait. Jamie, what were you saying?
I was saying how from like the picture of number one, no matter how much a bird lives, no matter how long a bird lives, it does not go down to the size of a beak or a size of a bird like the one in picture 4. To me, that just seems way too dramatic because the size in picture 1, it's this huge beak and a big eye, and it looks like a really big head of a bird. And then in picture 4, it's a small bird, really, really small beak, and the eye looks to have even shrunken down. And it doesn't even look like the same color. So, like for example, like how would you? To me, that change seems too dramatic.
Catherine, what do you think about that?
Well, we were basically talking not about genetics, but how like the food affects them. Because like bird number 1 has a bigger beak, so they're like able to eat like smaller foods or bigger foods. But then like bird number 4 would eat small foods. So if the drop happened, then it would like wipe out all like the plants. So the birds would just like die because they don't have the food.
So if correct me if I'm wrong, I want to make sure I'm hearing you correctly. You're saying that the food is going to impact the beak shape and size, right? Is that what you're saying? What then would impact the food? But what's the climate like? I mean, for me, that's the connection I'm having difficulty making, right? So we're all in agreement that the food is having an impact on the beaks. But my question then becomes: what's changing? What's changing the food sources? Damien, what do you think?
Climate's what it also said in the story that it has like very volatile climate changes, that it changes a lot.
Why? Where are they?
The Galapagos Islands.
Yeah, but where's that?
By the equator.
By the equator? Are you sure? How do you know that?
By Ecuador.
What's that?
By Ecuador.
Well, how do you know that? You just got this endless bucket of knowledge in your head? What if you had a map?
Yes, you have a map.
Would that help? Would it help if you had a map?
Yeah. Well, it just so happens.
Oh no.
Happen to have a map.
Playing around, you know.
So,
What do you got?
are you just waiting to see what I have to pull out of my bag of tricks, man? So, 2 minutes, talk about what signifies Can you give me an example? Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Most kids do. Most kids have got blue eyes. Keep that in mind. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes.
Very violent. Because you have violent customers and all this other stuff. You have good players,
Okay. Let's significance of the map. Veronica, what do you think?
I think that if it's really close to each other, it's really easy for there to be drops and
Why would it be easier for there? Why would it be easy for there to be droughts on the?
when it's like warm, hot, it's dried out.
Why would that have any significance? Simon? Why?
Because I don't know how to
Why would it limit the food source? Why would a drought limit the food source? What friend do you want to phone? Okay, you can phone a friend. All right.
Limit the food source because plants need water. So since there's droughts and there's no water coming in, the plants can't really grow.
So you're saying that if there's right, Veronica's saying the geographic location of the islands makes the likelihood that drought would be higher, right? Okay? And you're saying only certain types of plants can survive a drought. So you're saying, so what Simon is saying is that would limit the food source, right? Okay, am I hearing you correctly? How would that change peak size? Let me ask you this. What information do you have about the actual islands from the article? Ryan, any information actually about the islands themselves?
The island is extremely remote.
Okay, so there's not much around it, right? We can see that from looking at the map. That makes sense, Gianna?
It's a cluster of active volcanic islands in the Pacific Ocean.
Okay, so they're volcanic, so that may change the terrain or the lay of the land a little bit.
Yeah, like if you look at the map, like in the key, because it goes from like really light to like really dark.
What does that
The
indicate?
really dark green, it's like it represents mountains, and I'm pretty sure, I'm making like an educated guess, that all of like the dark green spots on the map represent volcanoes.
Are there volcanoes on every island?
It just says that it's a cluster of volcanic islands, so I'm just making a guess.
Alessandra, do we have any other information about the islands? Did anybody count them? There's how many? How many different species of finches do you have?
13.
So what species are island?
question, because we're almost out of time. I'm going to ask you, and I want you to, in the remainder of the time that we have, as you talk with your groups about this, is that a coincidence?